Having finished the skull, let's start talking about the rest of the bones in the axial skeleton. The hyoid bone. It's in your throat, right above your thyroid cartilage, what we call the Adam's apple. The hyoid bone is a U-shaped single bone. It's the only bone in the body that doesn't articulate with any other bone. Articulate means forms a joint with. The hyoid is simply suspended by ligaments. It's held in place. And what it does is it basically anchors a whole bunch of the muscles used in speaking and swallowing. Provides a center point that they can all pull on and keep in proper tension with one another. Suspended by a ligament and muscle from the skull. Supports the tongue, provides attachment for tongue, neck, and pharyngeal muscles. Pharynx is the fancy name for your throat. So pharyngeal muscles are muscles of the throat. It has the greater and lesser horns. So see, the big long parts are called the greater horns, and those two little tiny things are the lesser horns. What do you suppose those are for? They don't make a joint. They're for muscle attachment. Hyoid is also a forensic sign of death by strangulation. The amount of force that it takes to cut off someone's trachea, to completely cut off their windpipe and keep them from breathing, will normally fracture the hyoid bone. So in any suspicious death, they'll take a look at the hyoid, and if it's cracked, that's a sign that maybe it was a strangulation. So, somebody will, strangle their girlfriend or boyfriend and then, take him in a boat and out in the middle of a lake or river and dump the body overboard and think, oh, it'll look like they're drowned. No, it won't, you son of a bitch. They'll get you. You're doing 25 to life in San Quentin. That fractured hyoid, that's going to bust you. So don't do it, kids. Don't strangle your significant others, okay? They'll catch you. All right, the vertebral column, the spine, as we might otherwise say, built of 26 vertebrae, same as the number of letters in the alphabet. So if you ever can't remember how many vertebrae there are, just start singing the alphabet song and count on your fingers. And when you get done, that's how many there are, okay? Hopefully you know the alphabet song. I shouldn't count on that, but I'm going to go ahead and go with that anyway. There are 5 regions of the vertebral column. Cervical, there are 7 cervical vertebrae. Cervix means neck, so this is the neck area. Thoracic, there are 12. Thorax means chest. Lumbar, that's your lower back, there are 5. Sacral, that's the bone down there, 5. Those are normally fused together. They're not individual anymore. And the coccyx, again, has 4 that are fused, although with the advent of MRI, they're finding that sometimes the 4 bones of the coccyx are not fused, but it doesn't matter. So notice, we count the sacrum and the coccyx as 1 each. So see, 7 plus 12 is 19, plus 5 is 24, 1 sacrum, 1 coccyx, 25, 26. How can you remember that? You have breakfast at 7, lunch at 12, dinner at 5. 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar. All right, intervertebral discs. So the individual vertebrae, some people say vertebrae. Yeah, I got the Rona. It's just a lot of pollen. I'm coughing. So the vertebrae have to have little shock absorbers in between. Otherwise, when you jumped up and down, your vertebrae would be smacking against one another. You'd have a broken back. So the intervertebral discs are little shock absorbers, okay? Located between adjacent vertebrae, absorb vertical shock. Permit various movements of the vertebral column. So again, it allows you to bend. The back can arch. Your spine couldn't be one solid bone. You would be stiff and standing upright. You could never flex and bend in any way. So the fact that there are lots of individual vertebrae connected together gives you flexibility. The intervertebral disc consists of a fibrocartilaginous ring. When we get to the joints, we'll look at different kinds of cartilage. You may have seen them in Bio 156. So fibrocartilage is a very tough kind of cartilage. You find it in places like this, where you really need support and cushioning as well. So it's a fibrocartilaginous ring with a pulpy center. So the annulus fibrosus literally means the fibrous ring. Annulus means ring. And nucleus pulposus, this is the soft, squishy, pulpy center. I say that basically it's like a Tootsie Roll Pop. You got a hard candy outside and a soft, chewy center. That's the way the vertebral discs are. That'll come back again later because we'll see what happens when people get what's called a herniated disc. So a typical vertebra has unique parts to it, and they all have names, of course. This is anatomy. Everything has a name. So the body is the big central part. That's what supports the weight of your body. The body of the vertebra supports the weight of your body. The vertebral arch. So see how, yeah, it's so hard. If we were in class, I would have a vertebra and I could show you. See in the upper diagram where it says lamina, all right? That's like the slope of the arch. And then see where it says pedicle? That's like the base of the arch. So the two pedicles plus the two lamina form the vertebral arch, all right? See, it doesn't look kind of like a building, like a church maybe? You know, with the sloped roof and the walls on the sides. That whole thing is the vertebral arch. And it's composed of the pedicles, which are the walls, and the laminae, which are the roof. Okay? The vertebral foramen, again, foramen is a hole. That's the big hole in the middle. What goes in that hole? Yeah, your spinal cord. There are 7 processes altogether. Remember, a process is just something that sticks out. There are 2 transverse processes. Remember the transverse plane? So these are horizontal processes. They stick out on both sides. There is the spinous process. That's the one that sticks out the back. When you see somebody, you see a really skinny person wearing a swimming suit, and you look at their back, and you can see their back go bump, 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 bump. You're seeing the ends of the spinous processes. The spinous process is actually fused when the 2 lamina come together. So look in the upper illustration. The lamina on each side, when they fuse together, they form that spinous process. We'll see later on there's a certain disorder caused when the 2 lamina don't fuse together properly. Kind of in a way like we saw when the 2 maxillae didn't fuse together. Then there are 4 articular processes. Remember, articular means forms a joint. So what has to happen is that the vertebra has to form a joint with the one above it and the one below it. And that's what the articular processes are for. So there are superior articular processes and inferior articular processes, okay? So you can see them in the, they don't show very well. They're showing the facets. Remember, facet means the smooth part that's the face. I don't think I have that on your list to know. We just have to know the superior processes. So see in the bottom diagram where it says the superior articular facet, that's simply the smooth face on the superior articular process, okay? And then on the bottom, see where it says, let's see, where is that? They don't really show it very well, so I'm not even going to try to mention it here. Another slide will show that pretty well. So let's look at the vertebral notches. So you can see the inferior vertebral notch is very prominent. It's a big notch. The superior vertebral notch doesn't look like much of a notch. It's a very shallow notch, but it's still caused a notch, okay? Still called a notch. So what's going to happen is when those 2 notches come together, they're going to form a hole, and we'll see that coming up pretty soon. So here you see the vertebral cavity. When you put all the vertebrae together, each individual vertebral foramen, they link up together to form the vertebral cavity. So the vertebral cavity is what holds your spinal cord, okay? Then the intervertebral foramen, so look on the right hand side. When the superior articular process and the inferior articular process, so see in the diagram on the right where it says inferior articular facet, that's just the smooth face of the inferior articular process. So you can see there on the right, the superior articular process of one vertebra joins with the inferior articular process of another vertebra. And when the 2 come together, the 2 vertebral notches form the intervertebral foramen. What's the intervertebral foramen? Well, the vertebral foramen is for your spinal cord. But the spinal cord has nerves coming off of it, and those nerves have to go out to the organs and muscles of your body. And so the nerves exit through the intervertebral foramina. All right? That's how the nerves get out and go out to your body. Let's zoom in then on the cervical region. There are 7 cervical vertebrae. The first cervical vertebra is called Atlas, and it supports the skull. In Greek mythology, there was a character named Atlas who held the world on his shoulders. and your atlas holds your world on its shoulders. Your brain inside of your skull is pretty much your world, and your whole head is held up by atlas, the first cervical vertebra. You could also call atlas cervical vertebra number 1. Either name is fine. The next one down, the second cervical vertebra, is called axis. It has a big knob on it called the dens or the odontoid process, and it allows atlas to rotate around it. That's how you shake your head no from side to side. You are literally rotating axis around the odontoid process or dens of axis. We'll see pictures of those coming up before too long. The third to the sixth are typical cervical vertebrae. The seventh is called vertebra prominens. That's actually a medical landmark. You can palpate that externally. So if you go down the back of your neck, you can find that there's one cervical vertebra that really sticks out and has a big knobby thing on it, okay? That's cervical vertebra number 7. Has an extra long spinous process. It's called vertebra prominens. Oop, I talked over the transition between slides. Vertebra prominens was the last thing I said. Sometimes when I talk over the transition, it bleeps out the words, loses them. So there you see atlas and axis, okay? So notice atlas is just a ring of bone. And it has the superior facets, which are where the occipital condyles go. Remember, on the occipital bone, the condyles, those fit right into the superior facets, which are on the superior articular processes. Now notice the features on atlas are very reduced. They're not very visible at all. It's really just a ring of bone, okay? But it's very important. When you nod your head yes, you are rocking your occipital condyles on the superior articular facets of atlas. That's called the atlanto-occipital joint. Now you don't have to know the names of joints for your first exam, but for the next exam you will when we cover the joints. So again, I like to preview things. I like you to see the words before you actually have to know them. Look at atlanto-occipital joint. That's because it's where atlas and the occipital bone come together. See, it's named so easily. You know, what's big and red and eats rocks? A big red rock eater. How much do earrings cost for a pirate? A buccaneer. All right? See, these are easy questions. The words often tell you what's going on. Then atlas has that dens or odontoid process. Dens just means tooth. Odontoid, like an orthodontist, just another word that means tooth. It looks like a tooth sticking up. And you can see in the illustration on the right how axis will rotate around axis. All right? That dens allows axis to rotate. That's what happens when you shake your head no. Pivotal movement of the atlanto-axial joint says no. Notice here that joint is called atlanto-axial. Again, you don't have to know that for your first exam, but you will have to know it later in the semester. Well, on your second exam, to be specific. So atlanto-axial is where atlas comes together with axis. And by the way, when you have if you have a daughter and she goes out on her first date, you want to tell her throughout that date to make sure to use her atlanto-axial joint, not her atlanto-occipital joint. So when the guy she's on the date with says, "Hey, you want to go back to my place and have a drink?" she should use the atlanto-axial joint. Says, "Hey, you want to go park up there at the high school and look down on the lights of Tucson?" No, shake the head with the atlanto-axial joint. Do not tell her not to use her atlanto-occipital joint. Let's then look at the distinctive features of a cervical vertebra. They have smaller bodies but larger spinal canals, all right? Transverse processes are much shorter, and they also have a hole in them called the transverse foramen. That's for the vertebral artery, which carries blood to the back of your brain. So see the transverse process and the transverse foramen. That's guaranteed. A cervical vertebra will always have transverse foramina. That's the easy way to spot a cervical vertebra. It has to have a transverse foramen. And likewise, if it has a transverse foramen, it has to be cervical. All right, that's guaranteed. That'll never fail you. Cervical vertebrae always have transverse foramina. Spinous processes of C2 to C6 are often bifid. Bifid, like bifurcate, means they split into two. All right. Now, just to tie some things together that you'll see in Bio 202, the carotid arteries, remember, went through the carotid foramen of the temporal bone. That supplies blood to most of your brain. Enter through the carotid foramina in the temporal bone, supply blood to most of your cerebrum, which is the outer part of the brain, the highest part of the brain. We'll learn brain words later. The vertebral arteries instead come up through the transverse foramina of the cervical vertebrae, and then they enter the brain through foramen magnum. And that would, remember, that was in the occipital bone. They supply blood mostly to the cerebellum and the occipital lobe, which are the back parts of the brain. All right, now a typical thoracic vertebra. So remember, there are 12 thoracics. These are in your chest. So they have larger and stronger bodies than cervicals do because they support more of your weight. They have longer transverse and spinous processes. Now, why do they have longer transverse processes? Because ribs connect to them. They have big, long, sturdy transverse processes because ribs connect there. Ribs make joints. All right, that's why they're long and thick and sturdy. That's one way to spot a thoracic vertebra. They have facets or demifacets on the body for the head of the rib. I don't think I have demifacets on your list. I think facets I do have. That's just the smooth part where the rib connects. So look in the upper right, the diagram there. See on the transverse process, see the facet for the articular part of the tubercle of the rib. That's where the rib actually makes a joint. And then actually on the body, you can see the demifacets. That's where the head of the rib attaches to the body. So the rib attaches to the vertebra with two joints, one on the transverse process and one on the body. And so another easy way, in my opinion, to spot a thoracic vertebra is they look like a giraffe. And unfortunately, this view doesn't have one from a frontal view. If we were in class, I would walk around and have you look at the front of a thoracic vertebra, and damn if it don't look like a giraffe. It really does. So just keep that in mind. Thoracic vertebrae look like giraffes. Now the lumbar vertebrae, 5 of them, L1 to L5, that's how they're numbered. They're the strongest and have the largest bodies. Why? Because they support your entire upper body. So look at, in the upper right, they have big, giant, thick bodies, okay? They have to support all that weight. Then look at the spinous and the transverse processes. Look especially at the transverse process. They're just these little thin, wispy things. Why? Because there's no vertebrae, there's no ribs connecting down here. The thoracic vertebrae had to have ribs, so they had big, sturdy transverse processes. Lumbar vertebrae have little, tiny, thin ones, okay? And the spinous process, again, not very prominent at all. And in particular, that's where large muscles of the back attach, some of your lower back muscles. And if we were in class, again, it's too bad they don't have a frontal view here in this picture. I would walk around with the lumbar vertebra and have you look at it. And damn if it don't look like a moose. So thoracic vertebrae look like giraffes, lumbar vertebrae look like mooses, and that really does work, all right? I'll try to get you some views coming up where you can see that. So therefore, at the base of the spine, we have the sacrum. Union of 5 vertebrae, usually by around age 30. They slowly fuse during your early life. So the median sacral crest is where all the spinous processes have now fused together. So they now, instead of being 5 individual processes, they form one giant ridge. That is the median sacral crest. The sacra ala are the fused transverse processes. So instead of having unique individual transverse processes, they're all fused together. And they form the ala, the wing. Doesn't look like they have wings on the side in Spanish. Ala, wing. See how there are wings on the side? Those are the sacral ala, the 2 big wings. The sacral canal corresponds to the vertebral canal. All right. So remember each individual vertebral foramen, when they all link together, they're the vertebral canal. Well, within the sacrum, that canal still exists. But because all the transverse and spinous processes are fused together, it really makes one solid tube. So you can see the opening on the top and the opening on the bottom. It ends at the bottom with what's called the sacral hiatus. The hiatus means a gap or a space of some sort. Like when TV shows are not filming, they're said to be on hiatus. And then notice there is the auricular surface. That's going to articulate with the ilium to form the sacroiliac joint. So the auricular surface is called that because it's shaped like an ear. Auricular means shaped like an ear. It's an articular process, all right? Articular means forming a joint. It's going to form a joint with os coxa, the hip bone. So you can call it an articular surface, that's fine. It's also called an auricular surface, just to try to help you kind of remember, because it looks like an ear. Look at the diagram on the right. It doesn't look like a big ear on the side. That's why it's called the auricular. And then down at the bottom we have the cornu. Notice there's sacral cornu and coccygeal cornu. Here we have the coccyx we've moved on to. So the coccyx, again, is a union of 4 vertebrae, usually fused by age 30, but as I said, now with MRI, they're discovering a lot of people it's not fused. Yeah, that's what that says. So the sacral hiatus is something that is palpable. You can feel that. You can put your finger down at the base of your sacrum, and where the sacrum comes together with the coccyx, you can feel that little gap, and you can actually feel 4 little bumpies down there. Try it right now. Go ahead, shut the door, close the window shades, stick your hand down there, feel for the 4 little bumpies. Those are the cornu. Cornu in Latin means horns, so they're like 4 little horns. There are 2 horns at the bottom of the sacrum, and there are 2 horns at the top of the coccyx. So what you can do is with your finger, you can feel the space in between the 4 horns. That's often where caudal or epidural anesthesia is given. And you can see in the bottom right, look, see where it says SC, that's for sacral cornu. See where it says SH, that's the sacral hiatus. This allows you to do very precise delivery of anesthesia or whatever else, medications, whatever. You don't have to do x-rays or anything. You can find it just with your finger. You can find exactly where that is, all right? Anesthetized sacral and coccygeal nerves, all right? So those are important landmarks. All right, we're done with the axial skeleton. It's time now to move on to the appendicular skeleton.